It's 11 p.m. in Paris, and you're watching France 24. Let's take a look at our headlines. The U.S. Electoral College set to seal Joe Biden's presidential victory. In spite of Donald Trump's attempts, the nation's political system withstanding his assaults on the election results. Our Washington correspondent joins with the latest. U.S. COVID-19 deaths top 300,000 just as vaccinations begin. Americans who work in healthcare became the first to get the protective shots. And the U.S. slaps sanctions on Turkey for purchasing a Russian missile system. Ankara calls the move unfair, and it is likely to further deteriorate already strained relations. Thanks so much for joining us on the program. I'm Charlie James. Joe Biden won the 2020 U.S. election weeks ago, but Monday marks the next step in making his presidency official. Electors are gathering across 50 states and Washington, D.C. to formally vote, with most bound by law to go with the winner of the popular vote in their state. Normally, all this happens without much attention. But President Donald Trump has refused to concede and tried to use the courts and lawmakers to upend the results. So this year, the process is under a microscope. For the latest, let's cross to our Washington correspondent, Ketavan Gorjestani. Ketavan, where do things stand right now? How far along is voting?
Well, a majority of states have now cast their ballots, but Joe Biden is not yet above that 270 electoral vote threshold, which he will likely be crossing in the next hour because right now the vote has begun in California. California has 55 electoral college votes. So once that happens, that would put him above that threshold, meaning that he has been once again confirmed as the winner of this 2020 election. The final state to vote will be Hawaii. That will be taking place at 7 p.m. Eastern time, which is 1 a.m. in Paris. So that is the situation with the vote. But as you mentioned, the fact that we're even talking about this electoral vote process is something different this year. That's because, of course, Donald Trump has still not conceded this election. And the situation, the context, has made it very tricky, especially security-wise. You saw several states, especially those battleground states that Donald Trump tried to overturn, the results that he had tried to overturn in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, or Nevada. In those states, there was extra security. Some of the electors had to be escorted by police in and out of state houses. You had some states decide to hold these votes in secret rooms or not disclose the location at all for these votes because they feared that there could be some threats to the whole voting process. And this has made it very problematic here in the United States because it just showed, it was once again a symbol of how tense the situation has become. In Michigan, they completely closed down the state house because they said that they had actual firm and concrete physical threats to this process. And that is, of course, in part because Donald Trump is refusing to concede and his allies are refusing to consider Joe Biden as the winner. But this process is going on despite all the issues, and it will be done by the end of the evening, and then those votes will be sent to Washington.
So with the Electoral College even further solidifying Joe Biden's win, can we expect that Trump's cries of fraud and his lawsuits will, if not stop getting as much attention as they have been?
Well, it is hard to tell. Probably the president, Donald Trump, is not going to stop. The question really is what the Republicans, what his supporters are going to say, because that's really what's going to make a difference. So far, a lot of Republican lawmakers have pretty much gone along with the president, saying sometimes that they're just humoring him, letting him go through the phases. At the beginning, it was, we will recognize Joe Biden when the votes are certified. Then the certification came. They said, we'll see when all the legal challenges are done. All the legal challenges are pretty much done and were thrown out. Then they said that it would be at the end of this electoral vote process. So we'll see if a lot of those Republican lawmakers who were saying will recognize Joe Biden as the president-elect when electoral votes are cast. Those are the people we have to look at and how they are going to react. But of course, the final real hurdle and the final symbolic hurdle will be on January 6th. That's when the new Congress will convene to officially count those electoral votes that are taking place today. And that's when they'll officially declare Joe Biden as the new president of the United States.
Ketevan Gorgistani, our Washington correspondent, thanks for helping us understand this. On Monday, an intensive care nurse became the first person in the United States to receive Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. The country's biggest vaccination campaign ever is getting underway, with plans of protecting 100 million people by the end of February. Now, sadly, it comes too late for the more than 300,000 Americans who have already died from the coronavirus. Olivia Bizot has the details.
The largest vaccination campaign in U.S. history begins. Just 3 days after the Food and Drug Administration cleared the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for use, this nurse received the first shot.
This vaccine is exciting because I believe this is the weapon that will end the war. It's the beginning of the last chapter of the book, but now we just have to do it. Vaccine doesn't work if it's in the vial, right?
The first 3 million doses are being distributed to dozens of locations in all 50 states across the country. Front of the line are healthcare workers and elderly residents in care homes. Officials said senior members of the Trump administration would also be among the first to get the jab. But the US president later tweeted that people working at the White House should receive the vaccine somewhat later, unless specifically necessary. Biden has pledged to vaccinate 100 million people in his first 100 days in office, but he could have a difficult task on his hands. Like elsewhere, trust in the vaccine is fragile. Around half of people surveyed said they would take it, and a quarter have no interest. Increasing public confidence in the jab could prove critical in turning around the US outbreak, as the death toll passes 300,000.
Over to the UK, where starting Wednesday, London and nearby areas will be placed under the highest level of COVID restrictions. Infections have been rising rapidly in the capital, and Britain's health secretary says a new variant of the virus may be to blame. Officials are assessing the new strand, and the World Health Organization has been notified. However, at this point, there is nothing to suggest it is more deadly or wouldn't respond to a vaccine. Fraser Jackson tells us what will be changing in London.
Stricter measures for the UK's capital. As Christmas approaches, London and some of its surrounding counties will join other parts of the country in Tier 3, the highest level in the government's COVID response system. Under the new measures, bars and restaurants can only offer takeaway services, and people cannot socialise indoors with anyone not in their household. Hospitality venues must also close. The move was met with mixed reviews on the streets.
I think the human thing to have done would have been to have waited until after Christmas. I'm sure there's enough capacity for the NHS in London to take the strain, and that's what they should have done. I think it's a very bad move.
I think it's a good idea. It seems really crowded, and I think it's a bit crazy for it not to be Tier 3 at the moment, so I think it's a good thing.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock said infection rates were doubling every 7 days in some places, and he had a culprit.
We have identified a new variant of coronavirus, which may be associated with the faster spread in the southeast of England. Initial analysis suggests that this variant is growing faster than the existing variants. I must stress at this point that there is currently nothing to suggest that this variant is more likely to cause serious disease, and the latest clinical advice is that it's highly unlikely that this mutation would fail to respond to a vaccine.
Viruses mutate constantly as they spread from person to person, and scientists say most mutations have little impact on how people are affected. The British government has informed the scientific community and the World Health Organization, who say they are continuing studies on how the new strain prompts an immune response in those infected.
Turkey condemning what it called unfair U.S. sanctions over its purchase of Russian missiles. The Trump administration imposed the sanctions on Monday, despite Turkey being a longtime partner and NATO ally. It sets the stage for further confrontation between the two nations just weeks before President-elect Joe Biden takes office. Our correspondent in Ankara further explains the measures.
They target the institution that procures arms. It's called the Presidency of Defense Industries, and that's a body that very few people have ever heard of, but it reports to President Erdogan. It targets the head of that presidency, Ismail Demir, and 3 other individuals. It has taken Washington an awful long time to impose these sanctions. The missiles arrived in Turkey in August last year. I think that length of time is a testament to President Trump's personal regard for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Trump made it known very well that he didn't want to impose sanctions. And I think it's also a testament to the US reluctance to penalize a fellow ally. I believe this is the first time the US has sanctioned a NATO member under the Countering Anti-American Activities legislation, the CARTSA Act. The question is, will these sanctions work? And I think that depends on their effect on the world money markets, investment markets.
France 24's Jasper Mortimer in Ankara. Next, a bit of sports news. France will play host to the 2023 Rugby World Cup, and Monday was the draw for the tournament's pool stage. Among the highlights, New Zealand and France are set to renew their longtime rivalry. Selena Sykes has more on the matchups.
The Rugby World Cup may still be 3 years away, but excitement has already begun in Paris, where the draw took place on Monday. Hosts France will be facing Six Nations rivals Italy and 3-time champions New Zealand. A tough match for Les Bleus, which French scrum half Antoine Dupont says will be a definite crowd pleaser.
On connaît cette équipe, je crois qu'ils n'ont jamais perdu un match en phase de poule sur toutes les Coupes du Monde auxquelles ils ont participé. Donc voilà, on sait à quoi s'attendre, mais ça reste aussi un très bon match de rugby à vivre et une expérience incroyable pour les supporters, en tout cas, qui, je pense, ont été ravis aussi de ce tirage.
France have been revitalised under new head coach Fabien Galtier and are shaping up to become major contenders in 2023.
After playing at home 2023, it's going to be a fantastic challenge for each French player who can play for France. We have to prepare, to be ready, and to be ready physically.
South Africa.
Reigning champion South Africa will face Ireland and Scotland, while 2019 finalists England have been drawn with Japan and Argentina. Only 12 teams have qualified for the tournament so far. The remaining 8 will be finalised by November 2022. The World Cup will take place in 9 host cities across France. For the world of sport, full stadiums and crowds of fans feel like a thing of the past. Though organisers are hoping the tournament is far enough into the future to not be affected by the pandemic.
Let's take a minute now to remind you of our top stories right now. The U.S. Electoral College to confirm Joe Biden as the next U.S. president. Donald Trump's efforts to influence voting delegations and change the results have failed. U.S. COVID-19 deaths top 300,000 just as vaccinations begin. Americans who work in healthcare became the first to get the protective shots. And the U.S. slaps sanctions on Turkey for purchasing a Russian missile system. Ankara calls the move unfair, and it is likely to further deteriorate already strained relations.